The Florida Department of Education recently sent a letter to all private schools saying that they are not allowed to impose a mandate forcing kids to get vaccines in order to attend. Now, there are some private schools who are refusing to allow for a religious exemption, and the Department of Education says that those schools can be fined up to $5,000 for each incident. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So, of course, part of my channel is talking about health, education, and choices, and this really kind of brings it all together into one little subject here. Because, as you know, I am somebody who advocates for choice. I believe people should have a right to choose how they wish to proceed with their healthcare, and that includes both vaccines, but also, as I've discussed many times, other topics such as women's reproductive health and their ability to decide what is best for their own bodies. Okay. Now, in this particular situation, we seem to be talking about exemptions. Okay. Now, of course, there's a school mandate. The CDC has a recommended schedule. Each state has a mandate, but of course, each state should allow for at least some type of exemption. And there are actually three different types of exemptions that are out there. Number one, a permanent medical exemption. There are some medical diagnoses that would make it that a person should not get a particular vaccine, or including if a person had a negative reaction to a particular vaccine already or one of its ingredients. Okay, but there is no medical diagnosis that would exclude somebody completely from all vaccines. Okay, it's a case by case on the vaccine. Now, there's also a temporary medical exemption, and actually, there falls under two rules for that. First of all, a student is not considered up to date until they get the 7th grade entry vaccine for the DTaP, actually called the TDAP. That's the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine. So up through the second year of middle school, that a kid cannot be up to date because they haven't done it. So there is a temporary exemption that is used for that says that that the student has gotten all of their vaccines except for the 7th grade entry one. But then there's also a temporary exemption for kids who have started vaccinating but have not completed or not caught up. And so when that is signed off for by the physician or by the pediatric provider, we are signing off that the patient has commenced a schedule to complete the required vaccines from the school. Okay, and so there's no specific definition as to how long one must is allowed to take to complete it. I look at it as a good faith effort. If somebody says to me, okay, I'm going to commence the schedule now and I'll do the next one in 5 years, I don't really look at that as a good faith effort of completing it. But certainly I do have patients who want to give vaccines, but they want to split them up and delay them. And that's also how we use the temporary exemption, how we give a new exemption form each time that student gets another vaccine. Okay. Now, in addition to that, there is the religious exemption. And I usually don't talk very much about the religious exemption because that is a religious issue more so than a medical issue. Okay, but because this is now bringing in the Department of Education and the choices that people make, that's why I'm kind of talking more about this topic that I haven't really talked much about in terms of religious exemptions. Now, the state of Florida has allowed for religious exemption since the 1990s, okay? And later in that decade, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that no official of the state is allowed to ask any questions for when a parent makes a request. They're not allowed to ask to prove religiousness. They're not allowed to ask for a letter from a clergy. They're not asked to cite biblical passages in order to make their point. And in fact, the Supreme Court ruled that if anybody from the state, including in the schools, were to ask such questions, that was a separation of church and state versus state violation. Okay, and all the health departments know this, and you know, people go into the health department if they claim a religious exemption, and it's given. And you know, I've had patients who have done this, and only once was I told that there was a problem at the health department, and it turned out that the mom then said, but there was a substitute nurse there who didn't know the rules, and when the mom asked to speak to the supervisor quickly said, "Mom's right, give her the form." And that's kind of the way it goes at the health department. Okay, usually it's not a big scene, it's not a big anything. Okay, but there is this form that is filled out that is given by the county health department called the Florida, it's the DH, Department of Health 681 form. And that every county has this. It's not given out by the pediatrician because, again, this is a religious thing, not a medical thing. So we are involved in the medical exemptions, temporary and permanent, but not this. Okay. Now, the parents, as part of this, have to sign an attestation on this form saying the following. And I'm going to quote it here just to make sure you have a full understanding of what it says. The parent would sign, "I am the parent or legal guardian of the above named child. Immunizations are in conflict with my religious tenets or practices. Therefore, I request that my child be enrolled in school, preschool, child daycare facilities, or family daycare homes without immunizations." They sign the form. The Department of Health, the official, signs the form. They are then they have it, and there they go, and they're allowed to get into school. Now, approximately 12 years ago, there was an issue here because the Catholic Diocese of St. Petersburg decided that they were not going to accept the religious exemption, saying that it wasn't part of the Catholic doctrine. And a family sued them and lost. I actually had reviewed the case itself after it happened and see what the discussions was. It didn't seem as if the attorney may have missed on some relevant cases, because obviously a person of a different religion can go to a Catholic school or a Jewish school or anything like that. So it's not what the school stands for, it's the individual. This is about the rights of the individual, not the school. Okay, but then when they lost this, and then other schools started doing this, and it became that there are some families who have religious beliefs not to give their kid a vaccine, who then decide that they want to get the exemption, and then it's not accepted. Okay, now, interestingly, though, and with little public statements, something happened in May of this year that actually changed all this around. And it only came to my attention when this letter that I mentioned that was sent to all the private schools in Florida, that I got a copy of this letter and I realized that it says this. But back in May of 2023, there was a Senate, it was called Senate Bill 252 that passed, signed by the governor, where it specifically said that it was a prohibition of mask mandates and vaccines and testing mandates for any educational institution. Okay, interestingly, the law and its first draft said the word COVID-19 vaccines, but that word COVID-19 was actually stricken from the final law that passed. And so the law that passed does not specifically say no mandate for COVID vaccines. It says no mandate for any vaccine. Now, of course, this is more about being forced to do it or you can't get into school, because, of course, there is kind of a state mandate, but that's, of course, assuming that the exemptions are permissible and therefore the family can still do what they need to do, what they feel is right, or in the health issues, of course, if it's medically warranted for them to claim the exemption. Okay, so now on August 25th, Adam Emerson, who is from the Department of Education, he's actually is the executive director of what's called the Office of Independent Education and Parental Choice. This is a department. I didn't know such a department even existed, but in this, it said that he quotes a few things. He says in section 381.00319 of the state statutes, an educational institution may not impose a mandate on any person requiring vaccination with any vaccine. That's specifically what the wording says. Then he says in section, a little later in that same section, that the Department of Health may impose an administrative fine not to exceed $5,000 for every individual and separate violation of this section. So, of course, that could add up if they're doing that multiple times. Now, there was in this letter no formal complaint process defined, which I really wouldn't expect it, because, again, this wasn't a letter to the families letting them know what their rights are. This was a letter to the schools saying, hey, you can't do that. Okay. But Mr. Emerson, in this open letter, it was the official Department of Education letterhead. So this is a public document. And his phone number for the office for this, the number for this office is 850-25. I'm sorry, let me start that over. 850-245-0502. So the families can, who they feel that their religious rights are being violated by their school, they can call the number, and I guess that they can complain it. Now, I did put a call into Mr. Emerson just to see if there's another avenue that they're supposed to take, because it's not like a lawsuit or something like that. It's a penalty imposed by the Department of Education. So I haven't heard back from him. It's been a couple of days. I realize we have a hurricane going on, but if there is something different in terms of how parents are supposed to file this complaint, I will certainly make a new video and update and let people know about that. But it'll be interesting to see what happens if school refuses and if enough families do this. And I would be interested. So if there is anybody who does file a complaint with the Department of Education, I'd like to know how it goes, because I need that kind of feedback, because I'm not applying for this, so I don't know how it goes. But if you can send us a message, put something into the comments, etc., letting us know how that went, so we can of course let other people know too. So there's a little something different for you. Have a nice day.